Wait, what? I can do that? This is Eric Bell with Wait, What? Financial matters that matter for business and the people that own them. I'm fortunate today to have Doug Bender as my guest. Doug, over time, has had a number of leadership board positions with for-profit and nonprofit organizations, including local industrial commission advisory boards and Chamber of Commerce. He currently serves as chairman of the board for MJC and Associates, Inc., a Houston, Texas-based mobile notary firm, and is a board member of Virtual Sports Training, Inc., of Orange County, California, a leading-edge sports technology corporation. Doug has been executive program coordinator for the California State University Long Beach Human Resource Professional Certificate Program for 8 years. Doug has been involved with the World Business Academy as a fellow, the International Neocasting Alliance as a charter member, Forbes.com Small Business Insight panel members, and the Worldwide Network. Doug has been an adjunct instructor at the heralded California State University campuses at Long Beach and Fullerton, and has lectured many international business leadership delegations from around the world, including the People's Republic of China. He is currently adjunct associate professor at University of Southern California, Bovard College School of Business. Doug, thanks for joining us today.
Not a problem. I'm just happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
You know, one of the questions I want to ask you, I know you got a long background in human resources for a bunch of companies that I didn't mention because I was trying to keep this all abbreviated in terms of your background. What makes you really qualified to speak on this subject in regards to human resources?
Well, without going back through all the details that you went through, I'll make a couple of quick comments. First of all, I think my work with for-profit and nonprofit organizations over the many years that I've been blessed to be able to work with organizations large and small. Obviously, my board experience with for-profit and nonprofit organizations, you know, a lot of folks make a huge distinction between the two. I think it really sort of depends when you talk about the nonprofit arena, but they have people issues and problems. They have executive level issues and problems just like for-profit organizations. So that, in addition to some consulting experience that I've had, I retired very early in my corporate career many years ago at the age of 50 and went into consulting work full-time with small businesses in particular, small to medium-sized businesses, I should say, but a number of our clients were large for-profit organizations as well. And then finally, I'll make one more quick point because I think it's really important. What really makes me qualified to speak on this subject are all of the mistakes that I made over those same years that I just got through talking about actually gave me the various and sundry experiences that I need in order to rebound and to be stronger in terms of my skill set and my competency set. So I've made a lot of mistakes over the course of time as an executive and as an HR expert, but I've also had a lot of successes as a result of that.
You know, Doug, I've heard people, and this is kind of off topic, but I've heard people call human resources human capital. Is that one and the same, or how do you look at it?
I think they are used often interchangeably. And that's a really, really great question, by the way. I think those two terms are used interchangeably, but typically folks who have a tendency to think of people as human capital really do so in sort of a disaffected way, in sort of a dispassionate sort of way. I mean, they sort of look at it purely, truly by the numbers and as assets. And maybe that's one way of looking at it from a business perspective. I think that notion, by the way, is starting to become a little bit passé. I think people truly know and understand and appreciate those in organizations that represents human resources and what that brings to an organization's bottom line. So I think it's used interchangeably, but not so much now as it once was before.
Okay. When I think about human resources and all the stuff that's going on with the Me Too movement and different movements out there, what are some of the common mistakes that a small business can make when it comes to HR?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question, and I'll answer it beginning with the comment that you made a couple of seconds ago about this whole Me Too. One of the common mistakes I think small businesses make is that they believe that just simply by being small or a mom and pop shop that they are sort of somehow immune from that, or we just treat our business like a family and everything is okay. It's not okay. You're still subject to the same kinds of, laws of the land at the state and federal level as all of the rest of those organizations out there that happen to be super big organizations. And so to have individuals in your workplace, whether they're executives or not, who are not sort of sensitized to knowing and understanding how to manage and how to work in a place, in a structured place like this, in a professional sort of way, will get you in deep water. The other thing is that, some of the other mistakes that I think small businesses make, pretty interesting stuff, right? Like the hiring process is overly hasty. You just kind of sit down over a cup of coffee. After like 2 or 3 minutes, you just find somebody that you really fall in love with. They've got the skills that you need. And after all, you're really desperate to fill this role so that you don't have to do it anymore. Sometimes taking the extra steps and the extra time that you need in order to make the right decision choices is really critically important. I'll say one more thing about that, which is this. Even if the hiring process isn't overly hasty, I think small businesses also make the mistake of not really being intentional and structured and focused about ways in which you hire people and what it is that you're looking for in the role that you're trying to put somebody into. So there can be a mismatch of expectations and a mismatch of rewards on the back end. The other big technical mistake that I think small businesses make is misclassifying employees. Small businesses in particular, but also all businesses, large businesses even, are victims of this particular sin. They have a tendency to misclassify employees because some employees like loftier titles, or some employees, genuinely need to make more money to kind of pay the bills in their household. And so without changing the job description or without thinking much of it, you say, okay, fine, we'll just start paying you overtime. Keep track of your hours and you'll be okay. That's a real big no-no. And there's huge downsides to organizations, small organizations in particular, but any organization who misclassify employees over time. And that's especially true in the state of California. The other thing is, I think another big mistake small businesses make is that employee handbooks become either outdated or just non-existent. I frankly, personally, on a professional level, depending on the size of the organization, if it's truly a very small organization, say less than 10 or 15 people, I am not sure that warrants even having an employee handbook. But beyond that, though, the really important thing and a really big advantage of having employee handbooks has to do with the fact that everybody understands what the rules of the road are. Everybody understands, how they get paid, when they get paid. Everybody understands the rules of conduct in the organization. Everybody understands, what their benefits packages look like and that sort of thing. So there are really important reasons why you want and should have those things, but most small businesses, again, just sort of take it for granted. Also, in small organizations, training takes a back seat, training and developing people, and that's a huge mistake. If you've got a competition who's right down the street or in the next neighborhood over, who actually sees the real value in developing their people for the next big leap into the future, you're in trouble. And a big part of the practical rationale for small businesses not really focusing on training as much is twofold. Number one, they don't have the time. They just can't afford to take the time off to do that sort of development that they might want to do otherwise. Or number two, they just don't have the money. They're small, and so they don't feel like they have the money that it takes to get from here to there. There are, by the way, very creative ways for an organization, no matter how small they are, to get the people training and education and development that they need. And then finally, I'll say one more thing, because I'm a big fan of this one in particular. For many, many years, and well, even today, I guess I would be considered an expert in performance management systems. And I think small businesses in particular get this one wrong. First of all, it's hard for most organizations to know and appreciate what performance management is all about. But even then, beyond that, there's a real concern about documenting performance issues. Unfortunately, we live in the most litigious society in the world. And because we live in the most litigious society in the world, there's a tendency for us to just sort of paper everything under the sun, because we have to. We have to make sure that at the end of the day, if we ever have to go to court for whatever particular reasons, and we all know that we're subject to end up in court for any particular reason, we just don't have the documentation that we should have. And that's a big problem. A little bit of documentation goes a long way if you ever find yourself either in front of an agency trying to justify your overtime practices, or if you're in court trying to deal with an unfair termination charge or claim.
So, Doug, it sounds to me like consistency and also documentation are key.
This is true, by the way. That first point you made is very important. If you're going to be consistent, if you're going to be wrong or if you're going to be right, it doesn't matter as long as you're consistent with it. I think a lot of organizations and legal forums can somehow see your rationale. If you were consistently wrong, you did it, you made an innocent mistake, you made an honest mistake, may not absolve you from being guilty of something, but it certainly does mitigate the situation a little bit.
I was going to ask you, HR consultant versus an in-house HR person. Now, how does a small small business choose which route to go? Do they get a consultant first, depending on their size, or do they bring someone in-house, or does it matter how many employees they have or locations?
That's a great question, by the way. I mean, I think it depends. Part of it depends on the consultant that you're asking about. Some of it depends truly upon the growth curve, if you will, of the business itself. First things first, I do believe that small businesses don't have to have a full-time HR person and really shouldn't necessarily have a full-time HR person. You have got, as small businesses, have a number of resources available to them online or out there in the in sort of related industry segments, cottage industry segments that can do that piece of work for your organization, like PEOs, for example. But there are times when small businesses do need to actually have an HR consultant. And, frankly, it doesn't have to cost them that much. I think small businesses, when they do choose, they should think about things and look at things like, what's this individual's, related kind of experience. If they, for example, was just a specialist in HR for 5 million years, that doesn't make them an overall HR guru. My particular background was that I kind of came up through the ranks. And so every functional area of HR, I was very fortunate. It was a rare instance where every functional area, every area of expertise in HR, I actually grew up in. I spent significant amounts of time over the course of my career learning that the depth and the breadth of that particular area of specialty. Not everybody does. Also, any additional qualifications they might have. For example, have they worked with other small businesses and organizations before, and what did their successes and failures look like? And what other kinds of organizations? Have they worked with small organizations like yours in particular? Can they understand and appreciate some of the nuances of the work that you do and the practices that you have in place? Also, I think it's really important for small businesses to take a look at whether or not an HR consultant has the capacity to serve them in particular on demand. As a small business consultant, in years past, I've had individuals who called me at 10 or 11 o'clock in the evening. Sometimes they call me in the middle of the day and I may be tied up, but I have to have the ability to be able to respond quickly to those individuals because when they call, they need help right then and right there. So I think bandwidth is also important if someone is calling an HR consultant. And as you well know, this is all about relationships in terms of the ability to be able to kind of move things forward and move things quickly. People have to connect with each other very closely. So if the HR consultant can't respond directly to you and your needs, do they have the infrastructure available to them that will allow them to respond to your needs? They may not be able to do it directly themselves, but maybe they've got a counterpart or a business partner who also works hand in hand with them. I mentioned HR specialties a little bit before. I think it's really critically important to take a look at that because if someone has had, years and years of experience in, let's just say, sort of labor and employee relations or training and development, you really don't want to be talking to those folks about any problems or issues that you think you might have in things like compensation or employee classification kinds of areas. So there's a whole bunch of things. Most importantly, though, small businesses can choose an HR consultant by just simply doing the old-fashioned thing. Ask for references. Talk to people who know the individual, who's worked with them before or who's around them before, who can speak to their effectiveness and as professionals.
Doug, you were talking about specialty, and I was taking that into consideration in regards to industry, but it sounds like there's other things that a small business owner should be looking at in regards to specialty. And it also sounds to me like in terms of specialty, not one person can be all things in all those areas. You probably need an HR department for the most part, or maybe a couple people that specialize in different areas.
There are actually, sort of what I call boutique HR consulting practices who actually focus on small businesses or mid-cap businesses or large organizations. And, for example, you wouldn't go to Deloitte, I don't think. I'm not trying to invoke their name in vain, by the way, but I don't think you'd go to a large, global consulting house for to be a consultant, nor would they want to be a consultant for the small local, corner gas station or the Walmart. The other thing, of course, is that, again, if it's a one-person shop, not only do they have to be responsive, but they have to really truly know what they're doing. So you have to be able to figure out whether or not they have access to the resources that you may need, not just their own particular area of specialty. And so maybe a small-sized boutique HR consulting practice could be the way to go. It depends on your particular set of needs.
Okay. Doug, you spoke about specialty. I looked at that in regards to an industry, but what other considerations should a small business owner look at regarding specialty, or what triggers the need for an HR consultant?
That's a great question. I thought about that Dave Letterman's top 10 list when you brought up that question. I can't think of 10 things, but I can think of about 4 or 5. I think clues for small businesses suggesting that they may need to check out an HR consultant is when they've got some staffing challenges or opportunities in front of them at that particular moment in time. Maybe they're going through a growth spurt. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just simply going through some issues because of a high rate of turnover. There's some industries and industry segments where high turnover is sort of the norm. But for your particular business, if you think you're having an inordinate amount of foot traffic through your business as a revolving door, that's a really, really good sign that you probably need to sit down with somebody from HR to find out what's going on. Also, if you're having employee productivity issues, people aren't just sort of working up to expectations or up to potential. That's a really good time to bring in an HR consultant to sit down and talk with you and work with you and your team about, meeting those challenges and those opportunities. Also, in addition to that, I think when there's a change in business direction for an organization that could spell impact, either positive or negatively, on the people involved in that business, I think you really want somebody who knows what it's like to help shepherd people through change, because change always spells uncertainty, and uncertainty always spells fear, and fear almost always spell turnover and low morale and all those kinds of things. The other thing is, I think if there's a lack of policies and procedures and processes and systems, particularly as it relates to people, policies, procedures, practices, systems, and processes, if there's a lack of those things, I think that's a really good time for somebody to bring in an HR consultant who can help them with sort of the ABCs of doing good HR. If there's a change in economic performance of the business, I think you want to bring in HR, because that kind of potentially spells layoffs. And, for some organizations, they might be subject to federal and or state rules and regulations as it relates to employment of people and notification to those folks about what's going on. And then finally, if there's some sort of a sudden change in the work environment that may be foreign to you, or you just simply don't understand. You mentioned sort of the, hashtag Me Too movement, which is really about, it's a cultural change and a social change and global in nature, but it's also about the change in work environments too. So those are some things that I think sort of signal to small businesses, hey, you know what? I think I need to, make the investment to bring somebody in to sit down and work with me through some of this stuff.
Doug, if I had to look at one thing a small business can do for its future success regarding people, what would that be?
Excellent question. And it's usually one that small businesses get wrong more often than not. Your business is going well. It's thriving. You may have the usual set of problems and issues and so forth, but for the most part, you're making headway every day, every week, every month. And then something really critically important happens. The economy doesn't turn down. You don't get a lawsuit, none of those kinds of things. Your best person who carries 50% of their workload just walked out the door for a bigger and better opportunity, or just simply because they just couldn't, they wanted a change of venue. Now what? So I think my point is just simply this. I think the one thing that a small business can do for its future success, particularly as it relates to people, is something we call succession planning. Really having a plan of action, a contingency plan, if you will, a what if plan. I mean, God forbid something happens to the owner. God forbid something happens to a key person who's carrying 50% of the load for the business, or someone who actually has a specific area of specialty, particularly in these tech organizations now, these small entrepreneurial tech organizations. People have a high degree of specialty in one area versus another. You need to have a plan B and a plan C for when something happens, and particularly as it relates to people. Either they get moved on or moved up, but either way, you've got to fill the gap, and you've got to fill the gap quickly. And so I think that goes missing a lot, and particularly as it relates to owners. I mean, something happens, unfortunately, to an owner, they pass away or whatever. Quite frankly, the business goes by the wayside, because that individual was, the chief champion and visionary and expert for the organization, for the business. And then once they moved on, it just kind of fell by the wayside, because there was nobody else there in place. There was no plan B to pick it up and to move it forward. And just because it's a small business, it's because it's a family-owned business, doesn't mean that it's easy to pick up where the other person left off.
All right. Doug, is there anything I may have not asked that you might want to share with us before we sign off?
No, I think you covered a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time. I just thank you for the opportunity to be able to kind of share some of my views as it relates to small business and human resources for those particular organizations. It is not a topic that is usually served up and discussed unless and until something catastrophic happens. And then that's just simply too late. So I applaud the fact that you were willing to proactively have someone come on and sort of discuss, for the benefit of your listeners, things that I suspect many of them are already thinking about, but just love the idea of being able to hear someone else talk out loud about it.
Well, I want to thank you, Doug, for coming on with us today. And if you'd like to get hold of Doug Bender, please contact me at eb@wait-what.biz.